Walk into any grocery store in America and go to the breakfast aisle. You have done this 1,000 times. The syrup in the tall bottle, the pancake mix in the red box, the bag of rice with the smiling man on the front, the round carton of hot cereal with the chef. It is one of the most comforting corners of the whole store, and the word the industry uses for it is classic, heritage, Americana, the taste of somebody's kitchen, sold to you in a box. Here is what almost nobody standing in that aisle realizes. Every single one of those products was built on a real black person. A cook, a face, a recipe carried across an ocean and down through generations. And today, after all the money those brands have made, not one of them is owned by a black family. You have been looking at this your whole life. You pushed a cart past it as a child. You put it in your parents' pantry and your own. You poured it, you cooked it, you fed it to people you love on slow weekend mornings, and you never knew that you might have been looking at your own people, uncredited, unpaid, flattened into a corporate mascot, and sold back to you at a markup. Tonight, you find out who you were actually looking at. Think about what it takes for that to be true. Not one brand, not one coincidence. An entire corner of the store, the warmest and most nostalgic corner there is, standing on the shoulders of people who never saw a dime past a photographer's fee, if they saw that. And the reason you never noticed is that it was designed so you would not notice. The whole point of calling it classic and heritage and Americana is to file the serial numbers off, to take something specific, a real cook with a real name, and sand it down into something so generic that nobody ever has to answer for it. This is a countdown. 6 brands, 6 labels, and the real human being behind each one, building to the single most recognized face in the history of the American grocery store. We are going to name the person, follow the money, and see who owns the trademark now. And by the time we reach number 1, you are going to walk back into that aisle and never see it the same way again. These are not just brands. They are monuments. Monuments to black cooks that this country was happy to sell and unwilling to credit. And that word, monument, is the right one. Because a monument is what you build when you want to honor something in public while keeping it safely in the past. That is what these boxes do. They put the cooking on a pedestal, in your kitchen, on a shelf you visit every week, and at the same time, they hold the actual people at arm's length, frozen, nameless, turned into decoration. So let us count them down one by one and give the names back. Before we start, you deserve to know where this comes from, because a story like this attracts exaggeration, and exaggeration is exactly how a true story gets discredited. So here is the standard being used. Every case in this video comes from the record, from company histories, and the rebranding announcements the corporations put out in their own words, from trademark filings, from the actual lawsuits that descendants filed, and the actual rulings that came back, and from food historians who have spent careers documenting how these images were built and sold, scholars like Michael Twitty, who has traced African American foodways back to their African roots, and Marcia Chatling, who has written about how race and American food branding grew up together. And here is the part that matters most for your trust. Some of these stories are ironclad. A specific woman really was hired to become a specific mascot, and we can prove it. But some of the versions floating around online have been stretched. And one very famous claim, the one about descendants being owed billions of dollars, is not what actually happened in court. When we get to that one, we are going to draw the line, honestly, out loud, right in the middle of the emotional peak of this video. Because a story this important should not need to be inflated to hit hard. The truth hits plenty hard on its own. That is the deal I am making with you for the next half hour. Where the record is solid, I will tell you plainly. And where it is soft, I will tell you that too, instead of smoothing it over to keep the momentum going. If a case rests on family memory and local history rather than a corporate paper trail, you will hear me say so. If a number that gets thrown around is a lawsuit, demand, and not a court ruling, you will hear me say that as well. You do not have to take any of this on faith, and you should not, because the whole point of this video is that the real version is stronger than the myth. Let us begin the countdown. Number 6. Carolina gold rice and the mastery the whole thing was built on. Before there was a single mascot, there was expertise. And this is where the theft started. In the 17th and 18th centuries, the low country of South Carolina and Georgia became one of the richest agricultural regions in the colonies, and it got rich on rice, a specific variety, long grain and pale gold. That became known as Carolina gold. It built fortunes. It built plantation dynasties. It built some of the grandest houses in the American South. Here is what the heritage brochures tend to skip. The white planters who got rich on that rice did not know how to grow it. Rice cultivation in flooded tidal fields is one of the most sophisticated forms of agriculture on earth, and the knowledge for it came from West Africa, from the rice-growing regions of what is now Senegal, Sierra Leone, and the Gambia. Enslaved Africans from those regions were bought specifically because they carried that expertise. The irrigation systems, the dikes, the timing of the tides, the winnowing, the pounding, the whole science of turning a swamp into a golden crop. That was African knowledge, applied by enslaved African hands, and it made other people wealthy for 200 years. Sit with how specialized this actually was. Planters and slave traders advertised for people from rice country by name because a captive who understood tidal flooding was worth more than one who did not. The whole system, opening and closing the sluice gates to let salt water and fresh water in and out on the right schedule, was a technology. And it was a technology Africans brought and Africans ran. The great houses you can tour today, the ones with the columns and the live oaks and the guided history, were financed by a crop that white owners could not have produced on their own. The expertise was the asset. The people who held it were treated as property. And the descendants of those people are a whole culture of their own, the Gullah Geechee along the Carolina and Georgia coast, who kept the language, the crafts, and the foodways alive against every pressure to erase them. Their sweetgrass baskets, still coiled the West African way, were originally tools for winnowing rice. Their whole cuisine carries the memory of the crop. Follow the money into the present. And here is where it lands. Carolina gold rice was nearly extinct by the 20th century, and it has been revived beautifully as a premium heritage grain. You can buy it today under artisanal Southern brand names, sold as a taste of low-country tradition, at a price that would have been unthinkable to the people who first grew it. It is a genuinely wonderful product, but the brands that sell heritage Southern provisioning built on that rice are overwhelmingly not owned by the Gullah Geechee families whose ancestors made the crop possible. The genius came first. The ownership went somewhere else. That is the pattern, and you are going to see it again and again as we climb the list. Which brings us to a case that proves this is not ancient history. It is happening right now, in your lifetime. Number 5. Nashville hot chicken. Sometime around the 1930s, in Nashville, Tennessee, a black man named Thornton Prince got his revenge. The story his family tells is that a woman he had wronged tried to punish him by dousing his fried chicken in a punishing amount of cayenne and spice, expecting him to hate it. He loved it. He loved it so much that he and his brothers turned it into a business. And Prince's Hot Chicken Shack was born. That dish, fiery, crackling, painted red, with spice and served on white bread with pickles, is the original Nashville hot chicken. A black family invented an entire style of American food. For decades, it stayed a Nashville thing. A local treasure run today by Andre Prince Jeffries, Thornton's great niece, who has kept the family kitchen going. And then, Somewhere in the last decade, hot chicken exploded. It became a national category. It is on the menu at KFC. It is at fast food chains from coast to coast. It is a flavor, a trend, a whole genre of restaurant, and it generates enormous amounts of money every single year. Now ask the question this whole video is built on. Who profits from that explosion? The billion-dollar chains that put Nashville hot on the menu are not sending checks to the Prince family. There is no royalty for inventing a category. Food, unlike a song or a book, is almost impossible to own. You cannot copyright a recipe. So, the family that invented the thing gets the plaque and the pilgrimage from food writers, and the corporations get the revenue. Same mechanism as the rice, just close enough to touch. The genius is black. The scale is somebody else's. And notice the timeline, because this is what makes hot chicken so useful for understanding the whole list. This is not a story from a century ago that we can hold at arm's length and call the distant past. Prince's opened in the Jim Crow South, sold to a black clientele that other restaurants would not serve, and stayed a neighborhood institution for decades. The national gold rush around hot chicken happened in the last 10 to 15 years, in full view, with the family still cooking, still there, still watching their invention become a line item on corporate earnings calls. The pattern did not die out with segregation. It updated its software and kept running. A dish born out of exclusion became a trend that everyone but the originators could cash in on. And it happened while you were alive to see it. And this is the part worth sitting with as these first cases land. The recipes these brands and these categories imitated were real, and in almost every case, they were far better than anything that ever came out of a box or off a fast food warming rack. That knowledge did not survive because a corporation protected it. It survived because it was passed down in kitchens, from a grandmother to a mother to a child, hand to hand, generation to generation. The trademark got the fortune. The kitchen kept the truth. That is exactly why keeping the real thing in the family's hands matters. And it is the whole idea behind the Grandma Made Away Kitchen Collection. Not a product to be bought and rebranded. Not a face to be licensed. A record of the real cooking, written down and kept where it came from, so that the version that is actually good, the version these boxes could only ever imitate, stays with the people it belongs to. Stay with me, because the deeper we go, the more that idea matters.
Before we continue, I want to show you something amazing. We put together a simple guide for the people who really care about these stories. Because whether we're talking about old school food, forgotten trade, one truth remains the same. History is disappearing. This is for anyone who believes these memories, these lessons, these ways of life are still worth keeping. You can find it in the link in the description below, or you can scan the QR code right here.
Now we move from the recipes to something more personal. The brands where the theft is not just a flavor, it is a face. Number 4, Mrs. Butterworth's. Look closely at that syrup bottle. Really look at it. It is shaped like a woman. A matronly figure, wide at the base, with a rounded body and a warm apron presence. The kind of figure meant to say home, comfort, somebody's mother in somebody's kitchen. For generations, that silhouette sat on breakfast tables across the country, and you probably poured from her 100 times without once stopping to ask who she was supposed to be. She was supposed to be a mammy. That is the caricature the bottle draws on, the smiling, nurturing, endlessly serving black domestic figure that American advertising leaned on for a century to sell comfort and warmth, and the fantasy of being taken care of. Mrs. Butterworth is not built on one documented woman with a name we can recover, the way some of the others on this list are, and I want to be precise about that. But it does not need a single biography to belong here. It is the mammy image itself, poured into glass, put on a shelf, and sold as tradition. understand where that image comes from, because it was engineered, not accidental. The mammy was one of the most reassuring lies white America ever told itself. She was invented to say that slavery and segregation were gentle, that the black woman confined to a white family's kitchen was happy there, that she loved the people she served and asked for nothing back. She was fat, dark, aproned, grinning, and sexless by design, everything that made her feel safe and unthreatening across a dinner table. And she sold. She sold pancakes and syrup and cornmeal and cleaning products, because she carried a whole world view in a single friendly face. When you shape a syrup bottle like that figure, you are not just decorating a container. You are selling the feeling that comfort has a color and that its job is to serve you. And here is the modern chapter, the one that shows you how these companies actually respond. In the summer of 2020, as the country was reckoning with exactly this kind of imagery, the brand's owner announced it would review the Mrs. Butterworth's packaging. Review it. Consider it. The company acknowledged that the bottle was intended to evoke a warm family figure and said it recognized that the packaging could be seen otherwise. What changed after that was the shape of a bottle. What did not change was who owns the brand or where the profit goes. And that is the tension you are going to feel harder and harder as we climb the gap between changing the logo and changing the ledger. Watch the language in these announcements, because it is a genre unto itself. Notice that a company can say a caricature was intended warmly, as if intent were the issue, as if the figure had not spent 100 years selling a specific and ugly idea. Notice that the verb is always something soft. Review, reconsider, evolve, never anything that would cost money or admit a debt. The 2020 wave of these statements was real, and I do not want to be cynical for the sake of it. But look at what a review of packaging actually is. It is a promise to think about how the thing looks. It is never a promise to change who it belongs to. Number 3, cream of wheat and the chef on the box. For well over a century, a bowl of cream of wheat came with a face, a smiling black chef in a white coat and hat, holding out a bowl of hot cereal, an image that sold breakfast to American families for generations. The company called the character Rastus, a name that was itself a slur, a generic mocking stand-in for a black man. But here is where it stops being the cartoon and becomes a person. That chef on the box is widely identified as a real man, a cook named Frank White, who by most accounts worked in a Chicago restaurant in the early 1900s when the company photographed him for the image. And I want to be careful here because the historical record on this one is softer than some of the others. His identification comes largely from local history and family memory, rather than an airtight corporate paper trail. So we hold it exactly as strongly as the evidence allows. He is the man the record points to, widely and credibly, as the face on the box. And what happened to that man is the part that stays with you. Frank White was paid a small one-time sum to be photographed by the accounts that survive. His face then sold cereal for the better part of a century, on millions of boxes, in millions of kitchens. Think about the reach of that. There are people alive today on 3 or 4 continents who could describe that chef from memory. The white coat, the warm smile, the bowl held out toward you, and not one of them was ever told his name. The image was one of the most reproduced human faces of the entire 20th century, and the man inside it was invisible. He died in 1938, and he was buried in Leslie, Michigan, in a grave that stayed unmarked for decades. The man whose face was one of the most reproduced images in American grocery history did not have his own name on his own headstone. It was not until 2007, generations after his death, that community members finally placed a stone on his grave. Read that timeline again. His face outlived him by decades on store shelves, generating revenue the whole time, and it took until the 21st century for anyone to carve his name into a rock over his body. They kept the recipe. They kept the money. They kept his face for 100 years. They did not keep his name. If you are still with me, and this is landing the way these stories tend to land, do this one thing. Subscribe. This channel gives the names back, one story at a time, and there are a lot more names to give. Now, let us keep climbing. Number 2. Uncle Ben's. You know the bag, the one with the older black gentleman in a bow tie, dignified, formal, the picture of service. For 70 years, that was Uncle Ben, and the rice under his image became one of the best-selling rice brands in the world. The company's own telling is that the name came from a Texas rice farmer known for the quality of his crop, and that the face was modeled on a Chicago maitre d', a man named Frank Brown, who worked at a restaurant the company's executives frequented. A real farmer's reputation, a real waiter's dignity, combined into a mascot and put to work selling rice for 3 generations. And then look at that title again. Uncle. It is the same move as Aunt Jemima, and it is not an accident. In the segregated South, white people refused to call older black men and women Mr. and Mrs. because those titles conferred respect. So they called them uncle and aunt instead, a false intimacy that let you pretend at warmth while withholding basic dignity. The brand took that exact custom and turned it into marketing. It dressed a real man in a bow tie, called him uncle, and sold the fantasy of being served. That word did a lot of quiet work on that box. Uncle made him family without ever making him equal. It let a shopper feel a warm, homey closeness to a black man they would never have shaken hands with as a peer. And it let the company sell that closeness by the bag. Every part of the image was calibrated. The bow tie for service, not partnership. The gray hair for a reassuring, harmless age. The dignity, real and borrowed from a real waiter, put to work selling a product he would never own a share of. In September of 2020, the owner, Mars, announced that Uncle Ben's would become Ben's Original. The bow-tied figure came off the box. The word uncle came off the box. It was, by the standards of these companies, a real acknowledgement, and it was not nothing, but watch what actually moved and what did not. The image retired, the name softened. The brand kept selling rice. Mars kept owning it, and the profit stayed exactly where it had always been. Notice, too, that they kept the word Ben. The equity was too valuable to walk away from, so the company held on to the recognizable half of the name and shed the part that had become a liability. That is the tell. When a rebrand keeps everything that makes money and drops only what draws criticism, you are not watching a reckoning. You are watching brand management. A rename in 2020 changed how the box looked. It did not change the ledger underneath it. And that gap between the gesture and the money is the exact thing you need to understand before we reach number 1. So let us pause for one beat on how ownership actually works, because this is the machinery under the whole video, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. There are 3 different things tangled up in every one of these brands, and they are owned completely differently. There is the recipe, the actual knowledge of how to make the food. There is the likeness, the face and image of a real person, and there is the trademark, the brand name and logo as a piece of legal property. The recipe is almost impossible to own, which is why the Prince family cannot collect on hot chicken. The likeness is supposed to be protected, but for most of American history, a poor black cook had no leverage to protect it and often signed it away, if they were asked at all, for a flat one-time fee. And the trademark, the one thing with real, durable, transferable legal value, is the one thing these families almost never held. The trademark outlives the person. It gets bought and sold between corporations for decades. The human being who inspired it gets a photograph fee and a footnote. That is why a rebrand in 2020 or 2021 can feel like justice while changing nothing that matters. Retiring an image is free. It costs a company almost nothing to change a label. What would actually cost something is sharing the ownership, and that is the one thing that never seems to be on the table. Hold that in your mind, because you are about to watch it happen at the very top of this list. Put it in the plainest possible terms. Imagine you are a black cook in 1900 or 1935, and a company wants your face or your recipe. You have no lawyer. You may not be able to vote where you live. The courts are not built to protect you, and everyone in the room knows it. So you are offered a flat fee, take it or leave it, and you take it because the alternative is nothing. That signature or that handshake is the entire transaction. From that day forward, the company owns a trademark that can be sold, licensed, and franchised for 100 years, and you own a memory of the afternoon you got paid once. The law did exactly what it was designed to do. It protected the property. It just never counted you as the owner of anything. Number 1. Aunt Jemima. She is the most recognized face in the history of the American grocery store. And she was real. More than one real woman, in fact. The brand launched in 1889, and to bring the trademark to life, the company hired a woman named Nancy Green. Green was born into slavery in Kentucky, and in 1890, she was hired to embody Aunt Jemima in person. At the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, she stood at a giant flour barrel, cooked pancakes, told stories, and drew enormous crowds. She was, by every account, warm and skilled and magnetic, and she made that brand a phenomenon. She portrayed Aunt Jemima for the rest of her life. She died in 1923, and the company kept the character going without missing a beat. Look at what she actually was. Underneath the costume the company put her in, Nancy Green was a formerly enslaved woman who had made a life in Chicago, and she was, by every account, genuinely gifted with people and with a griddle. The company took that real charisma, that real skill, and strapped it to a caricature written by other people. The apron, the headscarf, the exaggerated dialect on the packaging, the whole Aunt Jemima persona, none of that was her. It was a costume built out of the plantation myth, and she was the living, breathing, talented woman hired to make the myth feel true. She drew the crowds. The trademark drank the profit. When she died, the brand did not pause to mourn her, because to the company, she had never been a person. She had been a face for hire, and faces can be replaced. Then, in 1935, the company hired another real woman, Anna Short Harrington. Harrington was a cook, a caterer, a woman known in her community for her food, and she became the face and the living embodiment of the brand for years. Real women, real cooking, real faces, building a fortune for a company that would eventually be owned by Quaker Oats and later by PepsiCo. For over a century, that image, first a crude mammy caricature, later softened but never honest, sold pancake mix and syrup by the tens of millions. And Harrington did not just lend her face. According to her descendants, she brought her own recipes to the table, her own cooking, the actual food that people came to associate with the brand. That is the detail that turns this from a picture into a theft you can weigh. A face on a box is one thing. Somebody's genuine recipe, the thing she knew how to do better than the people paying her, absorbed into a corporate product and sold under a cartoon's name, is another. Two women, 2 generations apart, both formerly at the bottom of America's ladder, both hired to be the warmth and the skill behind a brand that would outlive them by a century and never belong to their families for a single day. Now here is the moment I promised you, the place where we draw the line honestly. In 2014, descendants of Anna Short Harrington filed a lawsuit. Online, you may have seen the version that says the family was owed $2 billion or $3 billion and was cheated out of a fortune they had already won. That is the overstated version, and I am not going to repeat it as fact because it is not what happened. The lawsuit sought damages in the billions, yes, but the courts did not award it. The case was dismissed. The plaintiffs struggled to establish the legal relationships and the specific claims the law requires, and the enormous number that circulates online was a demand, not a judgment. The families did not win billions. That is the honest record, and I would rather you have the true version, which is damning enough, than a viral one that falls apart the moment anyone checks it. Because here is the true version. Real women gave their faces, their names, in inheritance case her actual recipes, to a brand that made a fortune, and their descendants went to court to claim a piece of it. And the courts largely turned them away. That is what happened. Not a stolen billion-dollar verdict. Something quieter and, in a way, worse. A legal system that had no real place for what was taken. And I want you to feel why the honest version is the more powerful one, not the weaker one. The viral story, the one where a family won billions and got robbed, is actually a comforting story if you think about it. It says the system recognized the wrong and just failed at the last step. The real story is harder. The real story is that when descendants brought this into a courtroom, the machinery could not even find the shape of the injury. There was no legal category for a century of a grandmother's face and cooking becoming corporate property for a one-time fee. The case did not lose on a technicality after nearly winning. It ran into the fact that the law was never built to see the theft in the first place. That is not a smaller injustice. That is a deeper one. And then, in 2021, after 130 years, the brand did what all the others did. It retired the name. Aunt Jemima became Pearl Milling Company, a nod to the original mill that made the flour. The image came down, the name came down, and the families of Nancy Green and Anna Short Harrington were not made whole because making them whole was never what the rename was for. The face came off the box. The ledger stayed exactly where it was. The pancakes still sell. PepsiCo still owns them. The only thing that disappeared was the reminder of who the whole thing was built on. So go back to where we started, back to that breakfast aisle you have walked 1,000 times. The syrup, the mix, the rice, the cereal. You know now what you are looking at. You are looking at a wall of monuments, and almost none of the people they were built on ever got to own a single one. Let us name the mechanism plainly, now that every case is on the table, because it is the same machine every time. There's the flat fee, the small one-time payment for a face that then sells product for a century. There is the unpaid likeness, the image used without compensation because the person had no power to refuse. There is a trademark that outlives the person and gets traded between corporations long after the cook is in the ground. There is the recipe reclassified as generic Americana, so that nobody has to credit anybody. And there is the modern rebrand, the quiet retirement of the face in a season of public pressure, while the profit stays precisely where it has always been. Line the 6 cases up, and the machine runs clean every time. The rice, where the expertise was the whole asset, and the people who held it were counted as property. The hot chicken, where you cannot own a recipe, so the inventors get a plaque and the chains get the category. The syrup bottle, where a caricature does the selling and a corporate review changes the glass, not the ledger. The hot cereal, where a real man's face outlived his own headstone. The rice bag, where a rename retired the bow tie and kept the revenue. And the pancake mix, where 2 real women built a fortune that the courts could not even find a way to return. Different products, different decades, one mechanism. Once you can see it, you will see it in half the grocery store. And now the reframe, because this is the part that matters most. And it is the reason this video is not a grievance and not a screed. This was not a room full of cartoon villains twirling their mustaches. It was something more ordinary and, honestly, more American than that. It was the slow, familiar drift of a culture's genius being sold before it was ever credited. Person by person, fee by fee, box by box, a country monetized what black cooks knew and then told itself a comfortable story about tradition and Americana, so it would never have to say their names. So do not walk away from this bitter. Walk away clear. Because here is the through line, and it is not a story about people who lost. Think about what it actually takes to end up on that shelf. These cooks were so good, so undeniable, that an entire country built brands on them, built breakfasts on them, built a billion-dollar aisle on what they knew and how they cooked. The mascot is not proof that they were used. The mascot is backhanded proof of how good they were. You do not put a stranger's grandmother on a national box unless her cooking was worth stealing. Turn the whole thing over and look at it from the other side. A country spent 150 years insisting that black people were inferior, and then quietly built its most comforting, most trusted, most nostalgic food brands on black hands and black knowledge. Those two things cannot both be true, and the boxes on the shelf are the evidence. The country believed in the cooking even while it refused to credit the cook. Every one of those trademarks is an accidental confession. It is capitalism admitting, in the only language it speaks, which is money, that this food was the best there was. The inheritance was never the trademark. The trademark belongs to a corporation, and it always will. The inheritance was the cooking, the knowledge, the technique, the memory of exactly how it was supposed to taste. And that still belongs to the people it came from, no matter whose name is printed on the box. If you want the real cooking that these brands only ever imitated, the actual thing, kept in one place so that it cannot be bought, boxed, softened, or renamed out from under a family ever again. That is exactly what the Grandma Made Away Kitchen Collection exists to protect. Not for sale to a corporation, not for licensing, not for a rebrand a generation from now. It is the opposite of everything you just watched. Everything on this list is what happens when the cooking leaves the family's hands. This is what it looks like to keep it there, written down, credited, and safe, so that the next time somebody wants to turn a grandmother's genius into a mascot, the real version is already home where it belongs. And now I want to hand this back to you, because you have one of these stories too. Almost everyone does. Somewhere in your family there was a cook whose pancakes, whose syrup, whose rice, whose fried chicken could have been a brand. She just never got a box. He never got a bag. Nobody photographed them for a label, and nobody put their face on a shelf. And the food was every bit as good as anything in this video, and probably better. The only difference between your grandmother and the woman on the box is that a company found the woman on the box first. So say the name. Down in the comments, tell me about the cook in your family whose food was good enough to sell, and say their name, because that is the one name a company can never take, buy, or rename. Put it here where it lasts. I read them, and I mean that. This is the one place in this whole story where the names go on the record and stay there, in the handwriting of the people who actually love them. And if this hit you, the next one will hit harder, because there are far more than 6. The next video walks through the other side of the same story, the many times black cooking quietly made someone else a millionaire, and the soul food secrets that grandmothers carried straight to their graves rather than hand to a stranger. That one is coming, and you do not want to miss it. Subscribe so it finds you. They put a stranger's face on the box and called it tradition. But the real tradition was never on that shelf, and it was never for sale. It was in your kitchen the whole time. It still is. Go say her name.